So welcome along. As Matt said, I've been around this environment, the Connect Collaborative, and the people who form the Connect Collaborative. Matt, for over a decade now. So it's been a real fortune for me to be here. But just so we're clear, I'm not the main event. Right? I just happen to be a guest speaker, and I'm going to talk about some stuff and have an opinion about some stuff. But ultimately, you're here to meet someone. That's the main event of a hub, is for you to build relationships with people and grow a network that's of value and is going to be valuable for you in the long term. So in terms of the Connect Collaborative, there are three core underpinnings that make what we do as a collaborative, as a community, that make it work. Different to anybody else in terms of communities or building networks. It's what we do is unique. And it's not a better class of networking. This is not, hey, let's do networking 101, 102, let's not shine networking. This is a totally different idea and a conceptual process to be able to build a network that becomes an asset for you long term. Because ultimately, most people want a network that refers them business, that makes a difference in their life, but most people don't get that until they're later in their life anyway. Right? So it's a time thing. So what we do is take that idea and that goal, and we look at what typically people do in terms of networking, and we took away all the stuff that really isn't necessary, and we put a couple of things back on the table that make a difference and are at the core of what we do in terms of building networks rather than just networking. So that's kind of where I want you to start and where I want you to kind of take off from. And I want you to lead into the idea of what if you had 1,000 advocates over the next couple of years. And advocacy I'll go into in a second, but what if there are 1,000 people who are advocating for who you are and what you did? Now, how you made that happen is irrelevant at this point, but I'm assuming that most of you could get to the point where, okay, well, that would make a fairly big difference in my everyday today, or whatever transactional business that I wanted. But beyond that, you may find that if you had 1,000 advocates, you wouldn't be doing what you're doing today. It may not be the thing because you have so many other bigger, greater opportunities or just more refined opportunities that give you more time with your family or more time to travel or whatever that is, gives you the opportunity to do what you want to do. So the idea from there is this thing. Now, where's Vincent? Okay, I'm going to call on my French counterpart. So this is
le canard digérateur.
Right? The digesting duck or the pooping duck, and it was built or invented by
Jacques de Vaucanson.
So when I was writing this talk, I picked a couple of really, really tough names, but I was fortunate enough to have a little French support, so I thought I'd call on it. And that's the bonus of having a great network. You can just go, hey, I know a French guy. Now, if there's anyone Dutch in the room, I'm going to need you in a second. So this is the pooping duck, and I find that far more hilarious than the digesting duck, right? It's, So this thing was created many, many years ago in the 15th century. Let me just pull the numbers. So it was a long time ago, well before robots and everything else, in 1739 by Jacques. So what it did is basically it was just an entertainment piece. It had no real purpose other than entertaining. Because that's what they did, those French back then. They just built ducks that did stuff. So what it basically did was it moved up, it ate grain, so it took up grain and then it pooped. Right? That was its entire purpose. And apparently, if it was in front of a bunch of ladies, he put a skirt on it. I don't know why, and neither did the information that was handed to me. So that was a pretty interesting little thing. Now, there is a purpose for this. So this is Jacques, and this is the duck. Now, the reason I kind of wanted to put that up is the last couple of days I've just been churning ideas, and the way that I write talks is I brainstorm a lot of random stuff, and I just happened to be listening to a great podcast called There's No Such Thing as a Fish, right? I highly recommend it if you're a nerd and you're into humour. And then they were talking about this, and so I'm brainstorming, and I'm throwing out these ideas, and that thing led to this, the idea of the black swan. Now, has anyone read this book? Okay, there's a couple of, yeah, great, I haven't. Be careful what you wish for. So anyway, I know the theory behind it. Okay, so it's based. It's a philosophy that's based, or kind of a sociological theory, and it goes back to 1697. Not the theory, the kind of the concept or the terminology of the black swan. It's based on the idea of a couple of Dutch explorers who came over, hence the Dutch name. Anyone Dutch here that know? No, I'm kidding. The explorer is irrelevant. But in 1697 they came over to Western Australia. Now, at the time, there were no black swans. The entire Western world believed that there are only white swans based on all of their experience over hundreds and thousands of years, right? So an entire Western culture didn't believe that there was a black swan until one dude came over to Western Australia and said, well, there's a black swan, right? Now, obviously, people knew that there were black swans because there were people here, right? So it's kind of that thing of a tree falls in the forest, right? It still makes a sound, just in case you weren't sure. So the idea was fascinating to me that an entire culture could go down this path and then suddenly one event could have a major change. And that's what the black swan theory is. It's three parts. The black swan, or the theory of black swan, originally in terms of the science of it, it's an unexpected event. It has a major impact, and the bit that I really love is it's always post-justified with, oh yeah, well there's the data that says that should have happened. Yeah. Right? Nobody knows, and then all of a sudden it's like the GFC, right? Oh well, obviously that was going to happen. Really? It wasn't. If somebody had thought it was going to be that obvious, maybe we should have stopped it. But those sort of things, like 9/11, the GFC is actually one of those events. 9/11. The internet and other events that kind of expanded well beyond the expectation and had a major impact. But the reason that I pulled this up was not necessarily for that theory, because it's not related to my talk in that exact terminology. It's the idea of a paradigm, or just an understanding that there is one way to do stuff. And it gets to the idea of networking. Almost every person I ever talk to goes down that path of networking as the churn and burn approach. You connect on social media, or you meet someone at a party, you offer to have a coffee. You go and have a coffee, you spend an hour, you pitch, they pitch. Nobody listens, you move apart. You agree that you're good people and you'll do the right thing, and then you never talk to them again. Like that is literally a paradigm for most people I've come across. And that's not wrong, so just so we're on the same page. I'm not saying it's wrong, it has a purpose, because if you don't know any better than that, it is quite effective, right? Because the end game for any sort of transaction, and I've said this previously, there is no significant transaction that ever occurs in your life or anyone else's life that doesn't come from face to face. You can sell a t-shirt online, but trust me, if you want to know how to ship it and make millions of dollars out of that t-shirt, you have to have face-to-face conversations. And that's what I mean by no large transactions. Small, constant transactions, yeah, that's fine. And you can do a lot of stuff with social media. I'm just saying that if you want a major change, if you want the major difference in life, you actually have to know people, because that's where opportunity comes. All right, you on the same page? Yes. So, when you bundle that up, there are three things that we talk about here that are vital to any building of a network. And again, it's the building of a network, not networking, it's building a network. Building long-term relationships and an asset of relationships for a lifetime, not for 5 seconds or one transaction. Right? Very, very different. It's like the golden swan, not the black swan. Right? The golden egg. Right? Collaboration, if you can't read the bits in bracket. That's just a phonetic spelling, and I just think that's cool. Because you can't read it. So collaboration is the first step in any building of a network. It's the idea of getting to know people, genuinely. Not with intention, but because you're people. Because you want to build relationships with people, so that you can build community and align yourself, and they can align, or the other person can align with you in terms of values, direction of goal, not necessarily the same goal, but it's about having conversations, it's about understanding, and it's not just about business either. I find that people who only have conversations about business are very, very limited. in terms of their opportunities, not as in people. So unless you're collaborating, unless you know a person, there isn't an opportunity. We talk about know, like and trust a lot. And that only comes from the investment of time and energy into understanding another human being. Now, the hippie stuff aside, to be able to do anything in business, you have to know stuff. And it is always more powerful to collaborate with someone than compete. Right? That is a fact of life. Now, a lot of people deny that through their actions. They agree with it philosophically, but not through their activity. And collaboration isn't necessarily a direct collaboration. So I don't always and just collaborate with builders. My background is an architect. I'm an architect by passion. So I practice architecture very, very differently. But that doesn't mean I only pursue, as Matt said, I only pursue plumbers and electricians and builders and town planners, and that isn't my network. For logistics reasons, that's not my only network, but also because I believe in having a real solid, broad, very diverse network. And that comes to the second point. So collaboration, right? That's the first foundation of any network, like strong, trusted advocacy network. Without it, it's just a bunch of people hanging around in a room. And that's where you'll find most events, networking events. That's what it is. It's just people hanging around, having a beer, meeting people they already know, but not really having any in-depth conversations or pursuing anything together. Just being in the same time at the same place. The second foundation is advocacy. This is the bit that most people think they know, but they don't do well. Advocacy isn't just speaking well of people when it comes up in conversation. It's not going to a barbecue and going, oh, my brother, he does this. Oh, that's great. Yeah, if only we'd talked about that last week. Oh, if only I'd thought about that last week. Who's ever had that happen? It's like 6 weeks later you get the information it could have been the job of your dreams. Yeah. Because advocacy in this community is the deliberate pursuit for other people, right? And promotion and positioning of other people. Deliberate and consistent. Not random, not out of the blue, not when it comes up. And I'm talking appropriately within your time and energy and all of that sort of stuff and your own priorities, so without detriment. But advocacy is always about, again, in terms of who we are as a community, advocacy is a deliberate promotion. A really good book that describes that idea is The Go-Giver. Now, the Go-Giver idea is exactly that, adding value and advocating for people for their benefit without obligation, but with expectation. Right? So there's a very slight difference and a very strong difference. So without the obligation of I will advocate for you if you advocate for me. How many people play that game? Does it work? No, because then it's the Mexican standoff and nobody does anything and then you might as well go home. So it's the idea that you will advocate for people that you know, like and trust in an appropriate way, because if you've met someone for 5 minutes, that's not a high level of trust. So you might want to qualify the advocacy, right? I know you. My gut feel says you're not an axe murderer. I'll introduce you to this person who I know really well, but just so you know, I've only met this guy 5 minutes ago. So you do your own due diligence, right? That's an appropriate way to advocate for someone you don't know. Now, if it's my brother, different advocacy. This is my brother. Trust me, I'm not introducing you unless I really know the guy. Different advocacy, but it's very deliberate and it's not random, which means. In this community, there are people who we call collaborators who are actively all the time searching for ways to promote their network. All the time. Now, I'm not going out of my day job to then be a salesperson for someone else. That's weird and it's also inappropriate and doesn't work. But if I'm having conversations and getting to know people, my radar is always listening for how can I help you by connecting you to people I know? What are the connections that I can make for you right here, right now? And it doesn't mean you need to do it right there. It's not a competition. But the people who advocate really well are doing it all the time. They're always thinking, how do I help someone else? It is a key, underpinning to any idea of advocacy. And it's an underpinning of this culture. Now that works incredibly well. Now that doesn't mean if you haven't got that attitude or it's not on all the time or whatever, that you're not welcome. It's a differentiation between what people think is advocacy, which is, hey, here's a card, give them a call. That's great. But if you wanted to meet someone and I called them up and said, hey, I know this guy, blah, 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 here's the background, here's how I know them, this is where they're at, I know that you have this problem and I believe it solves that, I think you should meet. What are the chances that something's going to come out of that?
Yeah.
It's very, very high. Now everyone knows that, but nobody's prepared to do it. Everyone wants that to happen for them. Raise your hand if you'd like people calling, and yeah, that's right. So the question is, how many times have you done that this month, this week, this year? And not this year, last year, but how often do you do it? Because you get what you are, not what you want. And if you aren't advocating for people, trust me, people aren't likely to advocate for you. At least they're not going to do it for the long term. And we're talking about long-term relationships. They might do it once, but if they don't, as Matt said, if you connect someone and they walk off into the sunset and you never hear from them again, do you reckon that you'd refer to that person again? Maybe. Because the idea is you did it for their benefit anyway, so that's their benefit. Great, go for it. Why not? But if somebody else came along and they were heavily interacting and they were advocating for you and you were advocating for them, how, left hand, right hand, where would you send your connections and to the person who's collaborating? Step 1, collaborate. Step 2, advocacy. Without those two fundamental principles, you don't do anything, let alone build a network. Those two foundations are the foundations that people want in their network, yet are very unwilling to invest the time, energy, emotional connection and get to know them and get to know their network. See, that's the price that you pay for that. It costs you nothing to build a relationship except time. Nothing. And yet everyone's so busy. Everyone's so busy. Which brings me to the third and the most important, because with those two, you can have a great network, you'll go far, you'll always do very, very well. But I'm talking about significant results. Duplication. Now, duplication is maybe not the right word or a word that you're familiar with, but it's the idea of compounding growth or compounding interest. Does everyone understand compounding interest? Oh, okay. So just quickly, compounding interest is when you pay 1 cent and then the next day it's 2 cents, and the next day it's 4 cents, and the next day it's 8 cents, and the next day it's 16 cents, and then the next day it's 32 cents, and then the next day it's 64 cents, and then it's 128 cents. Thank you. Thank you. I'm just an architect, I draw pretty pictures, right? That was a clap from an engineer, I noticed. So that's what compounding interest is. That's how your that's how your mortgage works, right? That's why suddenly you're paying way more at the end. How am I earning? Talk to your bank manager, work it out. This is not financial advice, right? This is how building a network works. So the idea of duplication is, how do you work beyond your own capabilities? Because all of this is great. I'm a great advocate, I'm a collaborator, that's great. But if it's just me, there is no opportunity. What if there's someone else? Yeah, that's great, so we're doing that. So that works a little bit better. But what if there's 10 people? What if there's 1,000? How do you create 1,000 advocates? Going back to our original conversation, how do you create 1,000 advocates? Oh, sorry, I was waiting for an answer. No. So the reality is you can't create 1,000 advocates by yourself. You can't. Your reach is only so long. If you've been to a couple of my last talks, I talked about the Dunbar's numbers. Right? It's the idea as human beings we only have so much influence in terms of personal relationships and connection. Personal relationship and connection, collaboration and advocacy. So you're limited by just who you are as a human being. So you have to use something that isn't reliant on you. You have to use tools. You have to use things that enable you to expand your growth, like a hub. See, if you're doing coffees, that's you, 1 hour, and one person. If you use a hub, that's 1 hour, and as many people as you like, within reason, human capabilities, And then anything can happen. So there's leverage in it. It's repeatable, it's duplicatable. You aren't the magic in a room like this. You're the connection in a room like this. But you aren't the bit that makes it happen. And there are other tools that you can get access to that make it work. But ultimately it comes down to systemizing an approach and being deliberate and consistent about what you're doing. They're very, very important things that most people fail completely at, including me. I'm human too. You need to be deliberate. You need to deliberately advocate. You need to be deliberately collaborating. You need to deliberately work with people. And deliberate means intentional, if that's another word that resonates with people. It's about not just flying by the seat of your pants. If you're in business and you're not deliberate, it doesn't work, just in case you're wondering. If you're an employee and you're not deliberate, trust me, you will be in that position, if you're lucky, forever. And I say if you're lucky because typically if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. Right? Because there are younger people coming up, better educated, younger, cheaper, and they'll move over the top of you. That's how that works. It's apathy. So when I talk about duplication in a building and network sense, it's the idea of how do you translate advocacy and collaboration and enable other people to build their network. Because if you think of the 1,000 advocates, if you can't contain within your arm's reach 1,000 relationships, could you do 10? Could you work with 10 people who want to become partners with you and partner with you in the idea of building a network and collaborating and, getting to know each other? Could you do 10? Could you work with 10 people? You advocate for 10 people and those 10 people advocate for you. Is that a good deal? Right, okay, so it's in your interest. Incredibly selfish. The go-giver is not some airy-fairy, I'm just doing it because I'm good at heart. No, trust me. When I'm doing it, I have a high expectation, and so should you. Yes. So that's the no obligation, high expectation. Don't get attached to the expectation, because that's then an obligation, right? So it's very different. But if you can connect to 10 people, that's great. Now, if they have a network of none, that's you and 10 people, that's not going to work, is it? But what if those 10 people knew 100 people and they were well respected in those networks, in their networks? So you knew 10 people and let's say 90 people, right? Round figures, architect, thanks. So you know 100 people, but 10 of them are advocating. Like they're going to partner with you in terms of relationship. And they have 100 people who they know well, they know, they like, they trust. Now, isn't that, if they're going to advocate into that 100 people, how much effort is that for you? Well, you've got to know the 10 people. But it's far easier than wandering around and introducing yourself to 1,000 people, isn't it? Yes. So that's why in a room like this, the balance is, do you want to come in here and introduce yourself to everyone? Each night you just do one at a time, or you find someone in here who you're meeting tonight, get to know them really well, and they'll point you in the right direction of the guys or the girls or the people who are going to be the person you're going to transact with, or they know the people that you're going to transact with. Is that not more effective? Yes. Yet most people come into the networks and they do the let's meet 100 people, right? And it's madness. When you know, right, black swan, they walk in and they go, there's only white swans, let's do this. And you're sitting there going, no, there's a black swan. You're standing right next to them, you're meant to meet them here. And that's the idea of the primary relationship in here. You have a primary connection in here who's connected to someone else who's connected to someone else who is likely to be connected to someone you should know. But the duplication enables you to work with people to pass on that information, to pass on the culture, pass on the how do you use LinkedIn better or social media better. It's the stuff and the information that's the bit that you need to move beyond. You have to enable people in an environment like that to build a network. If you're just networking, it's just you. And that's okay too. Right? Some people choose that as a pathway. That's fine. It's less effective, there's less leverage, and the time frame is far, far longer, like 40 years longer. Right? So I'm 40 now-ish. I don't know why you laughed then. Talk to you later. So if I have to do this for another 40 years, right, let's say I've totally stuffed up the first 40 years, I don't get a second crack at it, because by the time I'm 80, like what is there left to work on? Like if you're 20, that's great. Age is not a thing. It's just the amount of time that you want to invest to get to the point where you have an advocacy network that works with you. And you advocate for them. All of this is reliant on you doing those three things. All right? But like I said, most people don't believe in the 1,000 advocates. They don't believe that's possible. This, just in case you can't see it, this is... Any Monty Python fans? All right. We'll talk later. So this is a quest for the Holy Grail. This is an incredibly funny scene, Burn the Witch, which is hilarious. Now I suggest you Google it, but essentially who doesn't know who Monty Python is? So anyone younger than 20 in here? I said this once and somebody put their hand up. It's disgusting. So the whole point of this is, people burnt witches at the stake because they just didn't understand what they were doing, they didn't like them, there are a whole bunch of reasons for it, that's not the point. But the Monty Python thing is really, really funny because there's this wicked sense of logic that King Arthur, who's the guy on the left, goes through when he's talking to the crowd. And they're going, want to burn the witch? It's like, well, and he's kind of, are you sure? Because, she turned me into a newt and, all this sort of weird stuff. And there's this real circular knowledge that comes around. And I won't really, if you're into that sort of humour, I won't spoil it because it's quite funny. Even the text, I was reading it again this afternoon, was hilarious. But the logic seemed to be perfectly aligned. Yeah, but I'm still going to do coffees. No. Yeah, I get that whole thing. It's but it's the same. It's just better. No, yeah, I'm just going to do that. But she's a witch. Yeah. And you just think, yeah, well that makes sense, and you're convincing yourself that that makes sense. But at the end of the day, you're at the stake, baby. Because you're just following the path that everyone does and you're just not comfortable and you don't want to invest the time because really you're not really invested in relationships. All you want to do is just pitch your thing, and if you pitch 100, you'll probably get 2 transactions, which is enough for the year, and you'll be fine and you'll pay your bills. And that's fine. And it is fine. I don't say that just so you feel better. It is fine if you want to do it that way. But what I'm suggesting is there is a way that is going to get you the exact same result that you want, and then some. Yeah. For less effort. It's more stickable. But you have to invest in knowing how and why. But if you understand those 3 core values, collaboration, advocacy, and duplication, they are the 3 things that you just need to know. It's not like doing an MBA, 40,000 a year, 20 extra hours on your life every week, and I don't know about a return on it. Honestly, I don't know about a return on it. But they're all pathways to a result. But most people have never considered what is the result for the path that they're taking. They're all fine. We do not say that we are right. We do not say that other people are wrong. If you understand what the result is and you want the result, it is the right path to take. But if you are building a network, I don't know anyone else who shows people and enables people the way that we do as a community, because our interest is to build massive networks, because massive networks bring opportunities for everyone. Yeah. And that's what we do here. Now, you've got to have conversations with people and you've got to understand a little bit more if that's what you want to do. If not, that's fine. Glad you could make it tonight.
Hi everyone, my name is Julian. I've been coming along for a while now. I've been involved with the connection writing for a while. I'm going to give you a quick